The ad was simple enough: ESL tutor needed, professional athlete seeking English conversation partner, flexible hours, competitive pay. I'd answered it on a Tuesday afternoon when my bank account was looking particularly pathetic, and my thesis advisor had just assigned another round of revisions that would keep me buried in the library for months. I needed the money. Graduate school had a way of making you resourceful about survival. What I didn't expect was Nico. He opened the door to his downtown apartment wearing a gray Henley that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget, dark hair still damp from what I assumed was a post-training shower. The first thing I noticed wasn't his height, though he had to duck slightly under the doorframe, or the way his shoulders filled the space. It was his eyes, dark brown, almost black, with this quality of attention that made me feel like I was being seen in a way I wasn't used to. You are... He paused, searching for the word. Daniel? Yes, and you're Nico. I shifted my messenger bag higher on my shoulders, suddenly aware of how rumpled I looked after a day of classes. Thanks for meeting on such short notice. He stepped aside to let me in, and I caught the scent of something clean and warm. Soap, maybe aftershave. His apartment was sparse but expensive, all clean lines and neutral colors. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, letting in the golden light of late afternoon. Please, sit. He gestured toward a dining table that looked like it had never been used for anything as mundane as eating. Water? Coffee? Water's fine. I set my bag down and pulled out a notebook, a few textbooks, some printed worksheets I'd prepared. The routine of it helped settle my nerves. This was just a job. I'd tutored before. But when Nico returned with 2 glasses of water and settled into the chair across from me, something felt different. He didn't just sit, he positioned himself like he was preparing for something important. His posture was perfect, hands folded, attention focused entirely on me. So, I began, falling into my practiced opening. Tell me about your goals. What kind of English help are you looking for? He considered the question with the same gravity someone might bring to discussing philosophy. My agent, he says my English is functional, but I have interviews soon, press conferences. I need to sound... Another pause. Professional, confident. What sport? Soccer. Football, you say here. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. I play for the Fire, midfielder. I nodded, making a note. And you're from... Spain, Madrid. The word rolled off his tongue with a pronunciation that made my attempts at Spanish sound embarrassingly flat. I moved here 6 months ago. The basics, I understand, but the, how do you say, nuances. These are difficult. That's when it started, I think. Not attraction, not exactly, but recognition. I knew that feeling, the frustration of having complex thoughts trapped behind the limitations of language. I'd felt it during my semester in Prague, stumbling through conversations about literature in broken Czech, while knowing exactly what I wanted to say but not how to say it. Nuances are hard in any language, I said. Even native speakers struggle with them sometimes. He tilted his head slightly. You study languages? Linguistics. I'm working on my master's thesis about language acquisition and cultural identity. I felt heat creep up my neck. Most people's eyes glazed over when I mentioned my field. Probably more theoretical than what you need. But Nico leaned forward slightly like I'd said something interesting instead of boring. No, that is relevant. When I speak English, I feel like I am not myself, like I am playing a character. Something in my chest tightened. That's actually really common for multilingual speakers. The personality can shift between languages. Some researchers think it's because different languages access different neural pathways, different cultural scripts. I caught myself before I could launch into a full lecture. Sorry, I tend to get carried away with the theory. Don't apologize. His voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it. I like how you explain things, like you understand. Our eyes met across the table, and for a moment the professional distance I was supposed to maintain felt very thin. I cleared my throat and reached for my worksheets. Right, well, let's start with some assessment exercises. I want to get a sense of where you are with different skills. The next hour passed in the familiar rhythm of tutoring. I had him read passages aloud, listening to the slight heaviness in his consonants, the way he sometimes swallowed the ends of words. His vocabulary was better than he'd suggested, sophisticated actually, but there were gaps in idiomatic expressions, cultural references. But what struck me most was how he listened, not just to his own voice, but to mine. When I corrected his pronunciation, he didn't just repeat the word, he watched my mouth, absorbed the explanation of tongue placement and airflow. He took notes in handwriting so neat it looked like calligraphy. He didn't just listen, he absorbed, like he was learning me, not just the language. Your pronunciation is actually quite good, I said as we wrapped up the first session. The problems are mostly with rhythm and stress patterns. English has this musical quality that's different from Spanish. Musical? He looked genuinely curious. I found myself leaning forward, getting animated the way I did when a concept clicked. Every language has its own music. Spanish tends to be more syllable-timed. Each syllable gets roughly equal stress. But English is stress-timed. We rush through unstressed syllables and land heavily on the important ones. I demonstrated with a sentence exaggerating the rhythm. Please be careful when you cross the street. He tried it, missing the pattern at first, then gradually finding it. When he got it right, his whole face lit up. Yes, I hear it now. The satisfaction in his voice made something warm unfurl in my chest. This was why I loved teaching. These moments when understanding dawned, when a student suddenly heard what had been invisible before. That's exactly it. I smiled without thinking about it. You're a quick learner. I have good teacher. The comment was simple, probably meant as polite gratitude, but the way he said it, looking directly at me with those dark eyes, made it feel like something else entirely. I packed up my materials with movements that felt suddenly clumsy. Same time Thursday? Yes, thank you, Daniel. It wasn't his accent. It was the way he said my name, like it meant something more. Thursday came faster than I expected. I'd spent the intervening days trying not to think about Nico, which meant I thought about him constantly. During lectures, I'd catch myself remembering the precise way he'd said musical, or the moment of concentration when he'd tried to master that rhythm pattern. I told myself it was normal teacher investment in a student's progress. I was lying to myself, but it was a comfortable lie. This time, when he opened the door, he was wearing a simple white t-shirt and dark jeans. Somehow, the casual clothes made him seem more real, less like the polished professional athlete I'd expected. There was a small scar on his forearm that I hadn't noticed before, and his hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. How was training? I asked as we settled at the table. Good. Hard. He rolled his shoulders like they were sore. We have a match this weekend. Important one. Nervous? He considered this. Not nervous, but focused, like before an exam, maybe. I nodded, pulling out the materials I'd prepared. Speaking of which, I thought we'd work on interview techniques today, since that's one of your goals. His expression shifted slightly. Ah, yes. Is that not what you want to work on? No, it is good, necessary. But something in his tone suggested reluctance. It is just interviews are very, how do you say, performativo. Performative. Yes, I must give the right answers, say what they expect. It feels, he gestured vaguely. False. I set down my pen. What would you rather talk about? The question seemed to surprise him. What do you mean? I mean, if you could have a conversation in perfect English about anything you wanted, what would it be? He was quiet for a long moment, and I had the sense that no one had asked him this before. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. Home, maybe. What I miss about Madrid, or books. I love to read, but it is difficult in English still. What kind of books? Poetry, mostly. Garcia Lorca, Machado, some philosophy. In Spanish, I can lose myself in language. In English, he shrugged. I feel like a child trying to read above his level. Something shifted in the room. We'd moved away from the formal structure of a lesson into something that felt more like conversation, more like connection. What if we tried something different? I suggested. Instead of interview prep, what if we read something together? Poetry, maybe. We could work on comprehension and pronunciation, but with material that actually interests you. His face brightened. You would do this? It's your time. We should use it in a way that helps you. Most tutors, they have a curriculum, a plan. Most tutors aren't linguistics students who get excited about the intersection of language and identity. I felt heat creep up my neck again. Sorry, I know that sounds pretentious. It sounds passionate. The word hung between us for a moment. I like this better than pretentious. I laughed despite myself. Passionate works. Good. He stood up. I will get a book. He disappeared into what I assumed was his bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room. I tried not to notice the personal details, a few photographs on the side table, a book in Spanish left open on the couch, a soccer ball sitting on the windowsill like a casual sculpture. When he returned, he was carrying a slim volume with a burgundy cover. Garcia Lorca, he said, settling back into his chair. My favorite poet. I know some of his work. Romance Sonambulo, La Casa de Bernarda Alba. You know Garcia Lorca? There was genuine surprise in his voice. I took Spanish literature in undergrad. Lorca was intense, beautiful, and tragic. Yes. He opened the book carefully like it was something precious. He understood that language is not just words. It is music, emotion, truth. The passion in his voice made something in my chest tighten. This was a different Nico than the polite, slightly formal athlete I'd met on Tuesday. This version was animated, alive in a way that made me want to keep him talking. Read me something, I said. He looked up, surprised. In Spanish? Whatever feels right. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for. When he began to read, his voice transformed completely. The careful, measured cadence of his English disappeared, replaced by something fluid and musical. Even though I only caught fragments of meaning, the emotion was unmistakable. Verde que te quiero verde, verde viento, verdes ramas. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. When he finished, the silence felt charged. Now, in English, I asked quietly. He hesitated. It will not be the same. It doesn't have to be the same. It just has to be yours. He looked at me for a long moment, then down at the book. When he began to translate, his voice was softer, more careful. Green, how I love you, green. Green wind, green branches. The words were simpler in English, but something in the way he spoke them, the slight pause before green, the emphasis on love, carried the weight of the original. That's beautiful, I said. You think so? Even with my mistakes? There weren't any mistakes. And even if there were, it would still be beautiful. He set the book down and looked at me with that same focused attention that had struck me the first day. You always teach this seriously? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? Most teachers, they focus on correctness, rules. You focus on meaning. I felt exposed suddenly, like he'd seen something I hadn't meant to reveal. Only when it feels like something's worth saying right. The corner of his mouth lifted in a small smile. I think maybe you are not like most teachers. Is that good or bad? Good. He said it without hesitation. Very good. We held eye contact for a moment too long, and I felt something shift between us. Something that had nothing to do with language learning and everything to do with the way he was looking at me. I cleared my throat and reached for my notebook. So, for homework, maybe you could try translating a few more poems, just for practice with syntax and vocabulary. Yes, good idea. But he didn't look away from me. Danielle. Yeah. Thank you for letting me share this. Thank you for sharing it. When I left that afternoon, I could still hear the rhythm of Garcia Lorca in his voice, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had begun that I wasn't quite ready to name. By the third week, we'd fallen into a routine that felt nothing like traditional tutoring. I'd arrive at his apartment around 4 after my last class of the day. He'd have coffee ready, proper coffee, strong and dark, nothing like the bitter brew from the campus cafe. We'd spend the first few minutes in small talk that was becoming less small each session. "How was your morning?" I asked on a Thursday that felt more like summer than spring. "Good. We won Sunday." He poured coffee into 2 mugs that looked handmade, ceramic, the color of cream. 3-1. "Congratulations. I saw some of the highlights online." He looked up, surprised. "You watched?" I felt heat creep up my neck. "I was curious about what you do." "And?" "You're good. Really good." I accepted the mug he offered, our fingers brushing briefly. The goal in the second half was incredible. "You understand football?" "Soccer? A little. I played in high school." I took a sip of coffee and nearly groaned with pleasure. It was perfect, rich and smooth with just a hint of bitterness. "This is amazing, by the way." "Spanish coffee. I have it shipped from Madrid." He settled into the chair across from me. "You played soccer in high school?" "Midfielder, actually, though I was nowhere near your level." "Show me sometime." The suggestion was casual, probably meaningless, but something in his tone made it feel like more, like an invitation to something beyond these Thursday afternoon sessions. "Maybe," I said, which felt like saying yes. We'd been working through Garcia Lorca's poems, using them as springboards for discussions about language, culture, interpretation. It was probably the least structured tutoring I'd ever done, but Nico's English was improving rapidly. More importantly, he was becoming more comfortable expressing complex ideas, taking risks with vocabulary and syntax. "Today I want to try something different," I said, pulling out a slim paperback. "Contemporary poetry, Billy Collins. American? Very American, but accessible. His style is conversational, which might help with natural speech patterns." I opened to a poem I'd marked earlier. "This one's called The Lanyard. It's about, well, you'll see." I read it aloud first, letting him hear the rhythm and cadence. Collins wrote in a voice that was intimate but not overly precious, philosophical but grounded in everyday experience. When I finished, Nico was quiet. "What did you think?" I asked. "It is different from Garcia Lorca." "Different how?" "Less—" he searched for the word. "Dramatic, but still moving, like conversation with a very intelligent friend." "That's exactly right. Collins writes like he's talking to you personally." Read it again. I read it again, and this time I watched Nico's face as he listened. He was concentrating, but there was something else there, too. Enjoyment, maybe even recognition. "Now you try," I said, handing him the book. He read slowly, carefully, but with growing confidence. His pronunciation was nearly perfect, and he seemed to understand the poem's gentle humor, its meditation on gratitude and inadequacy. "This line," he said, pointing to a passage near the end. "Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong arms and energy. This is beautiful." "What makes it beautiful to you?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. It is simple words, but they feel important, like he is saying, "This is what we are. This is enough." Something in my chest tightened at the thoughtfulness of his response. "That's a really insightful reading." "You think so?" "I know so." I leaned forward slightly. "You have good instincts about poetry, about language in general." "I had good teacher," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me look up from the book. He was watching me with that same focused attention, but there was something different about it now, something warmer. "Nico." "Yes?" I didn't know what I'd been about to say. The room felt suddenly smaller, the space between us charged with something I couldn't name. "Nothing. I'm glad you're enjoying this." "I am enjoying many things about these sessions." The comment could have been innocent, probably was innocent, but the way he said it, looking directly at me, made my heart skip. I cleared my throat and reached for my notebook. So, for homework, Daniel. Yeah? Do you have time for coffee? Real coffee, I mean. There's a place near here. I looked at my watch. It was nearly 6, and I didn't have anywhere to be except my empty apartment and a stack of papers to grade. I shouldn't, I said, which wasn't the same as saying no. You should not, or you do not want to. The question was gentle but direct, and I realized I was at a crossroads. I could maintain professional boundaries, keep this safely in the realm of tutoring, or I could acknowledge what was happening between us, this slow-building connection that had nothing to do with language learning. I want to, I admitted. His smile was like sunrise. Good. The coffee shop was small and warm, with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture that looked like it had been collected over decades. Nico led me to a table in the corner, away from the few other customers. They make cortado here like in Madrid, he said, flagging down the barista with easy familiarity. You will try? Sure. He ordered in Spanish, his voice taking on that musical quality I'd noticed when he read poetry. The barista, a woman with silver hair and paint-stained fingers, responded in the same language, and they chatted briefly. Regular, I asked when she walked away. I come here sometimes after training. It reminds me of home. Do you miss it? Madrid? Yes and no. He leaned back in his chair, more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. I miss the language, the ease of it, the way I could read the newspaper without working so hard or make jokes without worrying if they translate. But I needed to leave, to prove to myself that I could succeed somewhere else, in a language that was not mine. The barista brought our drinks, small cups of coffee with perfectly steamed milk, the foam forming intricate patterns on the surface. And now? I asked. Now I am somewhere between, not fully Spanish anymore, not yet American. He took a sip of his cortado. It is, how do you say, liminal. I nearly choked on my coffee. That's exactly the right word, and a pretty sophisticated one. I have been reading your thesis. My thesis? I stared at him. How did you? The university website. Your advisor has some of your work posted. He looked slightly embarrassed. I was curious about your research. Oh God, that's so dry and academic. You didn't have to. It was not dry. It was fascinating. He leaned forward. This idea that language shapes identity, that we become different people when we speak different languages. I live this every day. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with academic vulnerability. What did you think? I think you understand something important about what it means to exist between languages, between selves. I think you understand it better than I do. I'm just theorizing. You're living it. Maybe that is why we work well together, theory and practice. The conversation was veering into territory that felt dangerously intimate. Not romantically intimate, not exactly, but personally intimate, like we were sharing parts of ourselves that we usually kept hidden. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. Why did you want to work with a linguistics student instead of a regular ESL tutor? He was quiet for a moment, turning his cup in his hands. Most tutors, they want to fix my English, make it perfect, standard. But perfect English is not, it is not me, you know. I wanted someone who would understand that language is not just about correctness. And you thought a linguistics student would understand that? I hoped. He looked up at me. I was right. Something passed between us in that moment, recognition maybe, or understanding, the feeling that we'd found something rare in each other. Tell me about your family, I said, deflecting from the intensity. My parents live in Madrid still. My father is an engineer, my mother teaches primary school. Very normal people who are still surprised their son became a professional athlete. His expression softened. They worry about me here alone. Are you alone, I mean? Mostly. My teammates are good people, but it is difficult to make real friendships when everything must be translated first. The loneliness in his voice made something in my chest ache. That sounds really hard. It is better now, he said quietly. Since these sessions started, I felt my breath catch. Nico, I know this is not what you are here for. These conversations, this... He gestured between us. But I cannot pretend it is only about English anymore. Neither could I, but admitting that felt like stepping off a cliff. What are you saying? I am saying that I look forward to Thursdays in a way that has nothing to do with language learning. I am saying that when you leave, I think about what you said, how you laughed, the way you explain things like they matter. He paused. I am saying that maybe I am not the only one who feels this. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. You're not. The admission hung between us like a bridge we couldn't uncross. So what do we do? He asked. I don't know. I looked down at my hands. This is complicated. Because I'm your student? Because... I struggled to find words that wouldn't sound ridiculous. Because I'm supposed to be professional. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. But it is happening. Yeah. I looked up at him. It is. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of acknowledgement settling between us. I should probably go, I said finally. Yes. But neither of us moved. Same time Thursday? Yes. I stood up, gathering my jacket and bag. Nico. Yes? Thanks for the coffee, and for this. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. I walked home through the early evening light, my mind spinning. Everything had changed in the span of an hour, and I wasn't sure what came next. But I knew I couldn't pretend anymore that this was just about language learning. Something was happening between us, something that felt both inevitable and terrifying. The next Thursday, I arrived at his apartment with an armload of books and a carefully prepared speech about maintaining professional boundaries. I was going to suggest we focus more on practical exercises, interview prep, business English, the kind of structured learning that would keep us safely in our designated roles. But when Nico opened the door, all my careful resolutions evaporated. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes and tension in his shoulders. His hair was mussed like he'd been running his hands through it, and there was something fragile about his expression. Are you okay? I asked, forgetting about professional distance. Long week, he said, stepping aside to let me in. We lost Tuesday. Bad loss. I'm sorry. It happens, part of the game. But his voice was flat, lacking its usual warmth. I set my bag down and looked at him more carefully. What's wrong? Really? He was quiet for a moment, then sat heavily on the couch instead of at our usual table. Interview yesterday, for a sports magazine. It was, he shrugged, difficult. How so? They asked about my adjustment to American culture, my feelings about leaving Spain, complex questions that require complex answers. He rubbed his forehead. And I could not find the words. In Spanish, I could have given them poetry. In English, I sounded like a child. I sat down next to him, close enough to smell his cologne. I'm sure it wasn't that bad. It was worse. They will write about the foreign player who cannot express himself, who seems cold and distant because he cannot find the warmth in English that he has in Spanish. The pain in his voice made my chest tight. Nico. Sometimes I think I made a mistake coming here, that I'm losing myself in this language that will never be mine. Without thinking, I reached over and covered his hand with mine. You're not losing yourself. You're becoming bilingual, bicultural. That's not loss. That's expansion. He looked down at our joined hands but didn't pull away. It does not feel like expansion when I cannot say what I mean. But you can. When we talk, when we read poetry together, you express incredibly complex ideas, beautiful ideas. With you, yes, but with others. Because you're comfortable with me, because you trust me. I squeezed his hand gently. That comfort, that trust, it will come with others too. It just takes time. He turned his hand over so our palms were touching. How do you know? Because I've seen who you are when you're relaxed. When you're not performing or trying to be perfect. You're articulate and thoughtful and funny. That person exists in English too. You think so? I know so. We sat like that for a moment, hands clasped, and I became aware of how close we were sitting, how his thumb was tracing small circles on my wrist, how the space between us felt charged with something that had nothing to do with language learning. Daniel? His voice was soft. Yeah? Thank you. For understanding. Thank you for trusting me with this. He looked up at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. There was vulnerability there, but also something else. Something that looked like longing. I started to pull my hand away, but he held on. Please, just for a moment. So I stayed, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine, the calluses from years of handling a soccer ball, the slight tremor that might have been nerves or might have been something else entirely. Better? I asked quietly. Yes, much better. When I finally did pull my hand away, it felt like losing something important. So, I said, trying to regain some semblance of professional composure, what do you want to work on today? Actually, he hesitated. Would you mind if we did not do formal lesson today? Could we just talk? Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was a bad idea, that I was already too involved, already crossing lines I shouldn't cross. But looking at him, really looking at the exhaustion and frustration and loneliness in his eyes, I couldn't bring myself to care about professional boundaries. Of course, I said. What do you want to talk about? Anything, everything. I want to practice being myself in English. So we talked about his childhood in Madrid, about the first time he realized he might be good enough to play professionally, about my dissertation research, about the semester I'd spent in Prague struggling with Czech grammar, about books and movies and the way different cities smell in the rain. As the afternoon stretched into evening, I watched him come alive in the way he did when we read poetry together. His English became more fluid, more natural. He started making jokes, using idioms, taking risks with pronunciation and syntax. More importantly, I started seeing glimpses of who he was in Spanish. Warm, funny, surprisingly philosophical. The person he'd been afraid was getting lost in translation. You see, I said during a pause in conversation, this is who you are in English, this version of yourself. With you, he said. I am only like this with you. For now, but it's a start. Is it enough, for you, I mean? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, he looked down at his hands. I know I am not easy to be around sometimes. The language barrier, the cultural differences, it must be frustrating. Nico. I waited until he looked at me. It's not frustrating, it's fascinating. You're fascinating. Something shifted in his expression. Danielle, I mean it. The way you think about language, about identity, it's remarkable. And you're funny and kind, and I caught myself before I could say more. You're a good person, in any language. The room felt suddenly small, the air between us thick with something unspoken. Nico was looking at me with that focused attention again, but there was something different about it now, something hungry. I should go, I said, but I didn't move. Should you? I should. I gestured vaguely between us. This is getting complicated. Yes, it is. I'm supposed to be your tutor. You are much more than my tutor. His voice was quiet but steady. You know this. I did know it, had known it for weeks, maybe since the first day when he'd looked at me like I was something worth seeing. Nico, I know this is not simple. I know there are reasons why we should not. He paused, searching for words. But I cannot pretend anymore that what I feel for you is only gratitude for good teaching. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. What do you feel? Like I have been learning the wrong language my whole life, and you are teaching me the right one. He leaned forward slightly. Like when you leave on Thursdays, the apartment feels empty in a way it never did before. Nico. Like maybe I moved to this country not for football, but to meet you. The words hung between us like a confession, and I felt something inside me crack open. I feel it too, I whispered. Yes. Yes. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. I look forward to these sessions all week. I think about things I want to tell you, books I want to share with you. I watch your games on TV and feel proud when you play well, like I had something to do with it. You do have something to do with it. You make me feel like myself again. We were sitting closer now, though I couldn't remember moving, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the slight scar on his jaw that I'd been wondering about for weeks. This is a bad idea, I said. Probably. I could lose my job, my reputation. I could lose my focus, my game. So we should stop, right now. Yes, we should stop. But neither of us moved. If anything, we seemed to be leaning closer. Daniel? Yeah? I'm going to kiss you now. If you do not want this, tell me to stop. My breath caught. Tell me to stop, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't. I didn't want to. When his lips met mine, it was soft and careful and perfect. He kissed like he spoke English, thoughtfully, with attention to nuance and meaning. His hand came up to cup my jaw, thumb tracing along my cheekbone. I kissed him back, letting myself fall into the warmth and rightness of it. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and when he made a small sound against my mouth, I felt it all the way to my toes. When we finally broke apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching. Okay? He asked. More than okay. I was breathing harder than I should have been from just a kiss. You? Perfect. He smiled, and it was like seeing the sun come up. Though my English teacher might disapprove. I laughed despite myself. Your English teacher thinks you're a very quick learner. I have good motivation. We kissed again, longer this time, deeper. I lost myself in the taste of him, the way his hand tangled in my hair, the small sounds he made when I bit gently at his lower lip. Oh, I was just his language tutor, but every lesson brought us closer. Gay Love Story. Part 2. We stood at his door, the lesson officially over 20 minutes ago. My bag hung from my shoulder, keys in my hand, all the props of departure, but neither of us moved. I like learning with you, he said quietly, his voice carrying that slight accent that made even simple words sound like music. But lately, I think I'm learning something else too. The hallway light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the uncertainty in his dark eyes. I should have asked what he meant, should have made some professional comment about expanded learning objectives or cultural immersion. Instead, I just held his gaze. There was something in the air between us, thick and electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I'd felt it building for weeks through shared poetry and late coffee conversations, through moments when our hands had brushed over flashcards and our eyes had met across grammar exercises. Daniel? His voice was softer now, almost tentative. I know, I said, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. What are we doing? I don't know. Should we stop? Probably. But when he reached up to touch my face, fingers barely grazing my cheek, I didn't step away. When he leaned in, giving me every opportunity to pull back, I stayed perfectly still. The kiss was barely there, a whisper of contact, tentative and questioning. His lips were warm and soft, and when I didn't retreat, he pressed closer, just slightly. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like crossing a line we'd been approaching for weeks. When he pulled back, we stayed close, sharing the same breath. Is this allowed? His voice was barely above a whisper. I thought about professional boundaries, about the ethics guidelines I'd signed, about the careful distance I was supposed to maintain with students. I don't know, I admitted, but I don't want it to stop. Something shifted in his expression, relief maybe, or recognition. Neither do I. We stood like that for another moment, the weight of acknowledgement settling between us. Then reality crept back in, the hallway lights, the sound of someone's television through a neighboring door, the fact that I was standing in his doorway after kissing my student. I should go, I said, but the words felt hollow. Yes, he agreed, though his hand was still on my face. Same time Thursday? Of course. I turned to leave, then looked back. He was still standing in the doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Nico. Yes? Thank you for the lesson. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. Thank you for teaching me. I spent the next 3 days trying to convince myself it had been a mistake. Thursday afternoon found me standing outside his building, bag in hand, having a silent argument with myself. I could cancel, send a text about feeling sick, recommend another tutor, disappear gracefully from whatever this was becoming. Instead, I knocked on his door. When he opened it, we both froze. The memory of Sunday evening hung between us like something visible, that brief kiss, the admission that we didn't want to stop. Hi, I said, suddenly feeling like I was 15 again. Hello. His voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders. We moved through the apartment like actors who'd forgotten their blocking. He offered coffee. I accepted. We sat at our usual table with our usual books and materials spread between us. Everything was exactly the same as it had been for weeks, except everything was different. So, I said, opening my notebook to a page of carefully prepared exercises, I thought we'd work on conditional statements today. If, then, constructions. Good, practical. He picked up his pen, focused intently on the page. We spent the next hour constructing hypothetical scenarios, discussing probability and possibility. If he had more time, he would read more poetry. If the weather were better, he would walk to training. If his English were perfect, he would feel more confident in interviews. Safe, academic sentences that kept us focused on grammar instead of the elephant in the room. But then our eyes met during a pause in the lesson, and the careful pretense crumbled. There was a kind of fluency that doesn't come from language. I felt it every time he looked at me, an understanding that existed beneath words in the space between what was said and what was meant. This is difficult, he said quietly. Conditional statements can be tricky. No. He set down his pen. This, us, pretending nothing has changed. I closed my notebook. What do you want me to say? I want you to say that you have been thinking about Sunday, that you have been wondering what it means. He leaned back in his chair. I want you to be honest. The directness of it caught me off guard. In English, Nico was still learning to navigate subtlety, to read between lines, but sometimes that meant he spoke with a clarity that was both refreshing and terrifying. Yes, I said. I've been thinking about it. And? And I don't know what it means. I don't know if it was a mistake or the start of something, or I shrugged helplessly. I don't know. But you are here. I'm here. So am I. We looked at each other across the table, and I felt that same electric tension from Sunday evening. The distance between us felt both infinite and negligible. What do we do? I asked. I do not know, but maybe we do not have to decide today. Maybe not. He picked up his pen again. Conditional statements, yes. If we continue these lessons, what will happen? I don't know. If we stop them? I don't know that either. Then we continue, and we see. It wasn't a solution exactly, but it was something, an agreement to move forward without knowing where we were going. The following week, he suggested we work late. I have interview tomorrow morning, he explained when I arrived Thursday afternoon. Important one, Sports Illustrated. If you have time, maybe we could practice until evening? I should have said no. Should have kept our sessions contained to their usual 2-hour window. But he looked nervous in a way I hadn't seen before, and I found myself agreeing. We worked through dinner, ordering takeout that sat cooling on the counter while we practiced interview questions. He was better than he thought. Articulate and thoughtful when he relaxed, but I could see his frustration with the small imperfections, the moments when he couldn't find exactly the right word. You're being too hard on yourself, I said around 8:30, when his answers started getting shorter, more clipped. They will not write about my effort. They will write about my words. Then let's focus on your words. I pulled out a different sheet of questions. but not interview questions. Personal ones. What do you mean? I mean, tell me about your best game this season, not for Sports Illustrated, for me. Tell me why it mattered. He looked at me for a moment, then began to speak. About a match in late March, rain-soaked and desperate, when he'd scored in the final minutes to secure a win. As he talked, his voice loosened, his hands moving as he described the play, the feeling of the ball against his foot, the sound of the crowd. That, I said when he finished, that's who you are when you speak English. That passion, that clarity, it's there. You think so? I know so. We'd moved to the couch sometime during the evening, sitting closer than our usual table arrangement would have allowed. The formal structure of the lesson had dissolved hours ago, replaced by something that felt more like friendship, more like connection. Tell me about your worst day this season, I said. He laughed. You want to make me relive trauma? I want you to practice talking about difficult things, because that's what interviews are, talking about things that matter to you. So he told me about a game in April where he'd missed a penalty kick, about the weight of failure in front of 40,000 people. His English faltered occasionally, but his meaning was clear, raw, honest. Better, I asked. Better. We were sitting close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to notice that he'd rolled up his sleeves, revealing the lean muscles of his forearms, close enough to catch the scent of his soap, something clean and masculine that made my pulse quicken. Daniel? Yeah? Thank you for this, for making me remember that I have things worth saying. You always have things worth saying. Not always, but with you. He turned to face me more fully. With you, I feel like myself. The comment hung between us, weighted with meaning. We were in dangerous territory again, that space where professional distance collapsed under the weight of something more personal. Nico, I know we should be careful. We should. But I cannot help what I feel when you look at me like that. Like what? Like you see me, really see me, not just the person struggling with English or the athlete with quotes for newspapers, me. My breath caught. I do see you. I see you too. The room felt suddenly smaller, the space between us charged with possibility. When he leaned closer, I didn't pull away. When his hand found mine, I didn't withdraw. This is probably a mistake, I whispered. Probably. But when he kissed me, soft and careful and full of question, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something I'd been waiting for without knowing it. This kiss was different from the tentative one in his doorway, deeper, more certain. I found myself leaning into it, my free hand coming up to cup his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against my palm. When we broke apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching. Okay? He asked, the same question as before. More than okay. Good. We might have kissed again, might have crossed even more lines, ventured into territory that would have made pretending impossible. But his phone rang, sharp and insistent in the quiet room. He pulled back with a curse in Spanish, reaching for the device on the coffee table. My agent, he said, looking at the display. I have to, of course, take it. He answered in Spanish, his voice immediately shifting to something more professional. I couldn't follow the conversation, but I caught enough words to understand it was about tomorrow's interview, about logistics and expectations. I stood up, putting distance between us while he talked. The interruption had broken the spell, reminded me where we were, what the boundaries were supposed to be. When he hung up, the moment was gone. Sorry, he said. He wanted to confirm details about tomorrow. It's fine, I should probably head home anyway. Yes, of course. We both stood there for a moment, suddenly awkward in the aftermath of interrupted intimacy. You'll do great tomorrow, I said, gathering my bag and materials. Just remember what we practiced. Be yourself. I will try. Don't try, just be. At the door, we paused again. The kiss was still there between us, impossible to ignore but equally impossible to discuss. Daniel? Yeah? Thank you for tonight, for helping me remember who I am in English. You don't need to thank me. I do. You give me confidence I didn't know I had. The sincerity in his voice made my chest tight. You've always had it. I just helped you find it. Maybe, but finding things is easier when someone shows you where to look. I smiled despite the confusion swirling in my head. Good luck tomorrow. Thank you. I turned to leave, then looked back. He was watching me with that focused attention again, but there was something different about it now. Something warmer, more intimate. Same time next week? I asked. Of course, always. The Sports Illustrated article came out the following Wednesday. I found it online during a break between classes, scrolling through the sports section more out of curiosity than habit. The headline read, Nico Herrera finding his voice in American soccer. The piece was better than I'd expected. The journalist had captured something of Nico's thoughtfulness, his perspective on the cultural challenges of playing abroad. There were quotes that sounded like him, not perfect English, but authentic, full of the insight I'd come to recognize in our sessions.
Sunday Bandeci Distis. Why so flying? Thì đó ôi hoa đi vàng mấy anh đi ý I found myself smiling as I read proud in felt both professional and deeply personal. Afternoon, I pulled up my did you read it? Then fully opened door. Interview is morning. It's good, really good. Face lit up. Think so. I know the listen to this quote about language and
To something like pride. I said that? You said that. It sounds intelligent. It sounds like you. He stepped aside to let me in, and I caught the scent of something cooking, garlic and herbs and something rich and complex. Are you making dinner? I asked. Paella, my grandmother's recipe. He looked slightly embarrassed. I was nervous about the article, so I cooked. I cook when I am nervous. It smells incredible. Would you like to stay? To eat? The question felt loaded with possibility. Sharing a meal felt different from our usual coffee breaks, more intimate somehow. But he looked hopeful, and the smell from the kitchen was making my mouth water. I'd like that. Good, it will be ready soon. We settled at the table with our usual materials, but the atmosphere was different, lighter. The success of the interview had lifted something off his shoulders, and he seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in weeks. So, I said, opening my notebook, how did it feel, speaking to the journalist? Better than I expected. I remembered what you said about being myself, and I tried to answer like I was talking to you instead of performing for strangers. And it worked. It worked. He paused, looking down at his hands. I have been thinking about what you said, about having things worth saying. Yeah. I think maybe I have been afraid to say them, not because of the language, but because he searched for words, because saying important things makes you vulnerable. The observation was so insightful, so precisely articulated, that I felt something shift in my understanding of him. This wasn't just about language acquisition anymore. It was about finding the courage to be seen. That's true in any language, I said quietly. Yes, but it is scarier in a language that is not your own. Why? Because if people do not understand, you cannot tell if it is because your words were wrong or because your thoughts were not worth understanding. The honesty of it made my chest tight. Your thoughts are always worth understanding. You think so? I know so. We looked at each other across the table, and I felt that familiar electric tension, but this time there was something else underneath it. A deeper intimacy, the kind that comes from really seeing someone. The paella, he said suddenly, standing up. I should check it. I followed him into the kitchen, watching as he lifted the lid on a wide, shallow pan. The smell that escaped was incredible. Saffron and seafood and something indefinably Spanish. My God, I breathed. Good? It smells like heaven. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. My grandmother, she would be pleased. She always said food was another language, one that everyone could understand. Smart woman. Very smart. She taught me that the best conversations happen over good food. Is that what this is? A conversation? He looked at me, spatula in hand, and something passed between us. I hope so. We ate at his small dining table, the paella served on simple white plates that made the colors of the dish pop, golden rice studded with pink shrimp and dark mussels flecked with green herbs. It was one of the best meals I'd ever had, but more than that, it felt like sharing something important. Tell me about your grandmother, I said. So he did. About a woman who had raised him while his parents worked, who had taught him to cook and to read and to pay attention to the way words could carry meaning beyond their literal definitions. As he talked, his English flowed more naturally than I'd ever heard it, animated by memory and affection. She would have liked you, he said at one point. Why? Because you listen the way she did, like words matter. They do matter. Not everyone thinks so. No, but the people who matter do. We finished eating as the sun set outside his windows, the apartment growing dim around us. Neither of us moved to turn on lights, content in the gathering darkness. This was perfect, I said. The paella? All of it. He smiled, and in the dim light it looked almost shy. I'm glad you stayed. Me too. We cleaned up together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that felt domestic, comfortable. When our hands brushed as I handed him a plate to dry, neither of us pulled away. Daniel? Yeah? I want to ask you something, but I'm not sure how. Just ask. He set down the dish towel and turned to face me fully. What are we doing? This, tonight, the other night, these lessons that feel like something else. What is this? The question I'd been avoiding hung between us, impossible to dodge any longer. I don't know, I said honestly. I know what it's supposed to be. Professional tutoring, nothing more. But that's not what this feels like. No, it feels like... Like what? Like the beginning of something I was not expecting but do not want to stop. My breath caught. Nico. I know it is complicated. I know there are reasons to be careful, but I cannot pretend anymore that what I feel for you is only gratitude. What do you feel? He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Like you see parts of me that I thought were lost in translation. Like when I speak English with you, I am still myself. You are yourself. With you, yes, but also. He reached up to touch my face, fingers tracing along my jaw. I feel something I did not expect to feel here, something I thought I had left behind in Madrid. What's that? Connection, real connection, not just friendly teammates or professional relationships. Something that makes me want to stay in one place instead of always thinking about the next game, the next season. The words hit me like a physical force. Nico, I know this is not what you signed up for when you answered my advertisement. I know you are supposed to be my teacher, nothing more, but I cannot help what I feel. Neither could I. Standing there in his dim kitchen, looking into his eyes, I felt the last of my professional reservations crumble. I feel it too, I whispered. Yes? Yes. Everything you said, I feel it too. Something shifted in his expression, relief mixed with something that looked like hope. So what do we do? I don't know, but I know I don't want to pretend anymore that this is just about English lessons. Neither do I. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. When I didn't, when I leaned toward him instead, he kissed me with a tenderness that made my knees weak. This kiss was different from the others, less desperate, more certain, like something settling into place rather than something being discovered. I let myself sink into it, into the warmth of his mouth and the way his hands framed my face like I was something precious. When we broke apart, we stayed close, breathing the same air. What happens now? I asked. Now we see where this goes. Together, together. We didn't plan what happened next. It wasn't a decision so much as a recognition that the boundaries we'd been maintaining were already gone, had been dissolving for weeks through shared poetry and long conversations and moments of understanding that had nothing to do with language learning. I stayed later that night than I ever had before. We moved to the couch, ostensibly to continue our lesson, but the books lay forgotten as we talked about everything and nothing. About his childhood in Madrid and mine in suburban Chicago. About the loneliness of graduate school and the isolation of being a professional athlete in a foreign country. I used to think the hardest part would be the language, he said, his head resting against the back of the couch. But language you can learn. It is the cultural things, the small differences that make you feel most foreign. Like what? Like the way Americans shake hands versus how Spanish people greet with kisses. Like the fact that small talk here is really small, weather, traffic. Instead of asking about family, about feelings, he paused. Like the way loneliness feels different when you cannot express it in words people understand. You express yourself beautifully. With you, but you are, he gestured vaguely. You are different. Different how? You listen like my words matter, like I matter. The simple statement made something in my chest ache. You do matter. To you? To me. We were sitting closer now, turned toward each other on the couch. The space between us felt charged with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Daniel? Yeah? What happens on Thursday? Do we pretend this conversation never happened? Do we go back to grammar exercises and vocabulary drills? I considered this. The smart thing, the professional thing, would be to say yes, to maintain the boundaries that were supposed to exist between teacher and student, to keep this contained. But looking at him, really looking at the hope and vulnerability in his expression, I couldn't bring myself to lie. I don't think we can go back, I said. No? No, I don't think I want to. What do you want? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. What I wanted was to keep talking to him like this, to keep seeing the way his face lit up when he found the perfect word for a complex thought. What I wanted was to explore whatever this was between us, this connection that felt deeper than anything I'd experienced in years. What I wanted was him. I want to see where this goes, I said finally. Professional boundaries be damned. His smile was like sunrise. Really? Really? Even though it is complicated, especially because it's complicated, the best things usually are. He leaned forward and kissed me again, and this time I didn't think about ethics or professional guidelines or the potential consequences. I just kissed him back, letting myself fall into the warmth and rightness of it. When we finally broke apart, it was nearly midnight. I should go, I said, though I made no move to leave. You should. This has been perfect. Yeah, perfect. He walked me to the door and we stood there for a moment, both reluctant to end the evening. Thursday? He asked. Thursday. Will it be different? Everything's different now. Good different. I looked at him, really looked at this man who had started as just another tutoring client and had somehow become something I couldn't quite name yet, and felt certainty settle in my chest. The best kind of different. After the lesson, as I walked away, he called out from his doorway, "Daniel?" I turned back. He was leaning against the doorframe, that half smile I was beginning to know well playing at the corners of his mouth. "Next time," he said, his voice carrying that slight accent that still made my pulse quicken. "Teach me how to say what I really feel." The words followed me all the way home, a promise and a challenge wrapped in one. As I walked through the quiet streets, I realized that what we'd been doing all along, these careful conversations, these moments of connection, had been exactly that. Teaching each other how to say what we really felt, and we were just getting started. EU